Hello, I'm Margaret Leora Workman, Warponie-art. I wanted to read to you another chapter of my book Pipple and Friends called The Tunnel Shaft System, Chapter 3. Pipple dashed straight into the other tunnel that he had seen, hoping to find Frolly and her siblings. Pipple was very worried that he would not be able to find them because he was not familiar with the tunnel shaft system. Pipple raised his hand to the wall to turn around, and his hand felt a fuzzy caterpillar. He looked at the wall where his hand had touched the caterpillar. He found himself staring at the caterpillar, who was staring right back at Pipple, smiling but worried. The caterpillar said to Pipple, "Sir, please brace yourself." Suddenly, Pipple heard a noise that came from under the cave that he was in and became very fearful about his present circumstances. Pipple steadied himself with his right hand on the wall, and he saw a jagged hole in the rock that he hadn't noticed right away. The black, fuzzy caterpillar slunk himself into it. Pipple heard more rumbling below the floor of the cave. He imagined that the whole earth was starting to tremble, along with the rumbling that was still happening. A crack formed between his 2 feet, going away from him. The noise was so loud that he had to cover his left ear, hoping his eardrum would not burst. He felt the floor beneath him start to move. Pipple could feel the caterpillar in the hole as he thrust his hand in to brace himself, but the caterpillar moved further down. Pipple wondered what was coming next. Right then, an explosion that sounded like a whirling wind sounded from above him, and he felt his body being squeezed, and he felt the air being sucked out of his lungs. Pipple felt lightheaded, and the room started to become white in color. His head started to feel so painful he screamed in terror. He tried to lodge his hand further into the hole as he felt the floor fall from beneath his feet, crumbling down into the deep darkness. Pipple started to breathe again because the pressure was gone from the air. Pipple suddenly distinguished a very large shape crawling up and along the wall in front of him. This creature came up from where the floor had crumbled. Then numerous other dark creatures started to crawl up the same wall, following the first one. Then they crawled past him and scuttled further up. One of the creatures crawled and slithered onto him, and he could feel the rough tentacles searching his body. It moved and shoved its face into Pipple's face, and Pipple hissed at him. The tentacled creature cowered and jumped away from Pipple. The creature slithered onto the wall and traveled upward to the ceiling, and then out of the entrance, along with many of the other creatures. Pipple did not realize how tired he had become from hanging onto the wall, with his hand buried in the hole. His wrist was hurting as it was constrained against the rock of the cave. He started hearing the noises of other mice scurrying through the tunnel shafts in all directions. He then heard rushing water down below, and fear sprung into his face and down into his body. He felt lightheaded again and made himself breathe so that he could think clearly. He wondered why he felt so heavy and paralyzed while all of the other mice were running up the wall to the same exit where the creatures had exited. The water started rising higher towards him, and he could see it rushing now. He looked down and saw Frolly swimming and frightfully yelling at her siblings to stay with her as they were trying to swim through the waves of the rushing water. She looked up, and when she saw Pipple, she was so excited to see her friend. Pipple noticed that Frolly looked scared and worried. She yelled up at Pipple to jump in the water with them, but then Frolly disappeared under a wave. Pipple could see that her siblings had gotten thrown over to the side of the cave and were not strong enough to swim to her because the current of the water was too strong. He suddenly felt fear again sting his face and travel down to his feet. He wanted to help them and not let them out of his sight, so he let his hand slip out of the hole and he fell feet first into the water. He could not see her but swam over to where she had disappeared under the current. The same current sucked him down further, and he was terrified about never seeing her again. He hoped that her siblings could stay up above the water next to the wall. The water pushed him through a small tunnel into another small room. The water here was less turbulent, and it was completely dark. He could not see, but the water took him to an area where there was a gap between the roof of the cave and the top of the water. He took a breath above the water and smelled how musty it was. He also smelled something that he had smelled before when he lived further down in the tunnel shafts with his caretakers. He never knew what it was, but the smell made him feel ill. He yelled for Frolly after he caught his breath. "Frolly! Pipple, I am here," Frolly whispered. Pipple heard her voice behind him, faintly talking in his ear. He turned his body to find the voice, and she wasn't there. Then he felt a hand grip his ankle, so he lifted his knee and grabbed a hand. He felt her body surface directly in front of him. She started to talk, but then coughed. "Oh, Pipple, it's you!" Frolly cried desperately. "Frolly, what happened? Everything is gone. Our whole life was here. We have to get out. How do we get out?" Pipple cried to Frolly. "Pipple, hold my hand. I feel the earth shaking again, and the water below our feet is getting warm." They locked arms, and the water began to pull them down under the water. They both felt for the entrance, and they could feel rushing water going by them. They pushed themselves out, and the water took them tumbling through the water. They tried to keep their arms locked, but it was impossible because their arms became too slippery. The water flowed at different speeds as it flowed through the tunnel shafts. Pipple swam for days with many other mice, wondering if he would ever see Frolly and her siblings again. He hoped the water was not going down further into the darkness of the earth. He had no idea where the end was, or if there was an end to these tunnel shafts. He decided to look for something to hold on to, maybe a plot of earth he could rest on. He noticed the tentacled creatures were on the sides of the cave, traveling up the sides to the top. He saw that in some of the areas there were gaps, where the walls did not continue all the way to the top, and those creatures were disappearing through those gaps. He started to feel larger rocks in the water, and he wondered if the water was not as deep in that area. Other mice were noticing that too, and were getting scraped on their legs and arms. He then saw a small area of mud that lined the bottom of the wall, and he tried to swim over to it. The water current was still too strong, and it kept carrying him towards more darkness. He started to feel more air circulating on top of the water. He felt relieved and happy. He wondered if the water was going to take all of them out of the tunnel to safety. The area of the cave widened and became larger, and Pipple wondered why. He started hearing echoes of water rushing, but those echoes were coming from somewhere else. He looked up ahead to see how the mice who were further up were reacting.